The battlefield was still smoking when Velara, commander of the Zorath Legion, walked across the ruins of the human outpost. Her armor glowed faintly from the heat of the last blast, and the soldiers under her command marched with proud steps. Behind them came the war beast, a towering monster of muscle, bone plating, and growling fury. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of alien dominance. To Velara, this day was like every other victory. Her people had crushed resistance after resistance across the stars. Entire planets had bowed before the roar of her beast. And now, another battle was over. She scanned the wreckage for survivors, not because she needed them, but because capturing one or two always entertained the troops. Prisoners made good examples, living proof of how foolish resistance was. A soldier called out, pulling a figure from the rubble. "Commander! A human!" Velara turned, her eyes narrowing. The figure was small compared to her towering warriors, fragile compared to the armored beast that loomed behind her. His body was covered in dirt and blood, his uniform torn. Yet his back was straight. The human's name, though she did not know it yet, was Ethan Hale. When he was shoved before her, she expected begging, trembling, or at least fear. That was what most prisoners gave her. Instead, Ethan met her gaze with calm, steady eyes. He looked at her as though she was not a conqueror, not a monster in armor, but simply another being in front of him. Velara tilted her head, surprised. Then, after a moment, she let out a laugh. It was sharp, ringing across the ruined outpost. "This is what the humans send against us? A soft thing, made of fragile bones and weak skin." She circled him like a predator, her soldiers laughing, with her. "Look at him. No claws, no armor, barely any muscle. If I blew on him, he might break in half." Her soldiers laughed harder, their voices echoing in the smoke. Even the war beast seemed to growl in amusement, as though mocking the small figure standing in front of it. But Ethan did not flinch. His eyes moved briefly to the beast towering behind her, then back to her face. His lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "Are you finished?" he asked quietly. The laughter of the soldiers stumbled into silence. Velara blinked, taken off guard. She had expected fear, maybe even anger, but not calm words spoken like he was the one in control. "Fragile, yes," Ethan said, his voice steady, "but still standing." The soldiers muttered to each other. Velara studied him carefully now. The human's body was broken, dirty, clearly weak compared to her troops. But there was something behind his eyes, something steady, something she could not read. It was not strength of muscle. It was something else, something more dangerous. She crouched down so that her eyes were level with his. "Tell me, human, do you not fear my beast?" She gestured to the towering monster, its claws digging into the scorched ground. "It has crushed tanks, it has torn through armies, and you could not even break one of its teeth." Ethan's gaze flicked up at the creature. He studied the beast, noting how it shifted its weight, how its handler pulled lightly at the chain, how its chest heaved when it breathed. He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked back at Velara. "I've seen monsters before," he said finally. "Some had claws, some had guns, some had crowns. They all fell in the end." Velara froze. For a heartbeat, she almost forgot to breathe. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. She had been called many things: commander, destroyer, conqueror, but never had someone spoken to her with such steady defiance. She laughed again, but this time there was less humor in her voice. "You speak like your kind has hope left. That is amusing." She stood tall, her armor clinking as she moved. "Perhaps I will keep you alive for a while. You may be fragile, but at least you are entertaining." Her soldiers laughed again, though their laughter was more uneasy now. Ethan's calm was unsettling, though they would not admit it aloud. The war beast growled again, as if sensing the strange tension in the air. Its claws scraped the ground, its jaws dripping with saliva. One strike from it would break the human into dust. Everyone could see it. Everyone believed it. Everyone. Except perhaps the human himself. As they marched him back to the alien camp, Ethan did not stumble. His hands were bound, his body bruised, but his eyes kept moving. He studied the soldiers' armor, the formation they marched in, the weapons they carried. Most of all, he studied the war beast. Every movement, every sound, every detail, Velara noticed. She rode beside the beast, watching him closely. "What are you looking at, fragile one?" she asked. Ethan looked up at her, then at the beast. Weak points. For the first time in many battles, Velara did not laugh. She stared at him in silence, then turned away, her mind unsettled. The campfire burned bright that night. The Zorath. Soldiers celebrated their victory with loud songs and heavy drinks. The war beast slept in its cage, its breathing like thunder in the night, and in the corner of the camp, bound and guarded, the fragile human sat quietly. His face was calm, his eyes sharp. He replayed every detail in his mind. The way the beast moved, the way it was controlled, the mistakes the aliens did not see. He whispered to himself, so low no one else could hear. "They think I'm fragile. Let them." The stars above shimmered, and in that moment, the war was far from over. The night in the alien camp was filled with noise. Zorath soldiers celebrated loudly, beating drums made from strange metals and shouting victory songs into the sky. The war beast rested in its cage, chained by thick iron bindings that could hold even its rage. Its breathing shook the ground like a storm. Every soldier trusted those chains, believing no force could break them. But away from the firelight, one human sat still. Ethan Hale, bruised and bound, leaned against a rock. His wrists hurt from the alien cuffs, yet his mind was clear. He watched everything. The way the guards stood, the way the beast twitched in its sleep, even the way Velara sat apart from the noise, silent in her command tent. Ethan thought of Earth. He remembered when people had once looked at humans as prey. Thousands of years. Ego lions, wolves, and beasts larger than his ancestors ruled the wilds. Yet humans had survived. They had hunted with stones, with fire, with teamwork. Fragile bodies, yes, but inside them was a will that did not break. That same will now burned in him. One of the guards noticed him staring and sneered. "What are you thinking, fragile one? Do you dream of running? The beast would tear you apart before you reach the forest." Ethan did not look at him. "I'm thinking about history." The guard frowned, confused. "History? Your beast is strong," Ethan said, his voice calm. "But strength always meets something it cannot crush. That's how history works." The guard laughed, thinking it nonsense. But the words lingered. Something about the way the human spoke, quiet, steady, like he believed every word, made the soldier uneasy. Morning came, and with it silence across the camp. Soldiers gathered near the arena, a wide circle of sand and stone where the war beast trained. Velara stood at the center, her posture straight, her armor gleaming. Her eyes found Ethan as the guards dragged him forward. She studied him with interest. The fragile human still did not look broken. His face was bruised, his arms marked by cuts, yet he walked as though nothing weighed him down. It made her curious. It made her cautious. "Today," she announced to her soldiers, her voice loud, "we will test this creature's courage. He claims not to fear the beast." She turned her head, her eyes narrowing at Ethan. "Let us see if his words mean anything." The soldiers cheered. They loved these games. Nothing brought them more joy than watching prisoners fall before the war beast. It was both entertainment and proof of their superiority. Ethan's eyes moved across the arena. He saw the beast waiting behind the gates, chains rattling as it growled. The ground was torn from past battles, marked by claws and blood. He did not feel fear, not in the way the soldiers expected. Instead, he felt something sharper, something focused. Velara stepped closer. "You are unarmed. You are weak. Against my beast you will break. Do you accept this fate, human?" Ethan looked at her, then at the beast. His voice was calm. "No, I don't accept fate. I make it." The crowd roared with laughter. Soldiers slapped each other's shoulders, shaking their heads at the arrogance. To them, this was only another fragile human speaking big words before being crushed. But Velara did not laugh. She remembered his eyes from the night before, sharp and searching. She wanted to know what he truly was. "Release the beast," she commanded. The gates opened with a thunderous crash. The war beast charged out, its body a mountain of muscle and bone plating. Its roar shook the walls, echoing into the sky. Ground trembled under its claws as it moved, its eyes glowing with fury. The soldiers cheered louder, chanting its name in their guttural tongue. To them, this was not a fight. It was a performance, a display of their empire's strength. Ethan stood his ground. He did not run, though the beast's shadow fell over him like a storm. He studied its movement, the way its right leg dragged slightly when it turned, the way its head tilted before every strike. He had seen patterns like this before, long ago, in animals on Earth. No creature was perfect. Every beast had a weakness. The first strike came fast. The beast's claw swept down like a falling blade. Ethan dove aside, rolling across the sand. Dust filled his mouth, but he was alive. The crowd cheered at his survival, mocking him. To them, it only meant the game would last longer. Velara watched closely. Her soldiers thought the human's survival was luck, but she saw the way his eyes moved. That was not luck. That was calculation. Ethan stood again, dust covering his uniform. He breathed slowly, keeping his heartbeat steady. The beast turned, snarling, saliva dripping from its jaws. It lunged again. Ethan ran toward the wall, forcing it to follow. When the beast slammed against the stone, cracks spread across it. But Ethan had already rolled away, untouched. "Interesting," Velara murmured. Her soldiers laughed louder. "He runs like a rat," one shouted. But Velara shook her head. She saw more. The human was not only running, he was watching, waiting, learning. Every move of the beast gave him more information. Every mistake it made became part of his plan. Minutes passed, and Ethan kept dodging. His body was bruised, his arms bleeding from close strikes. But he never stopped. The soldiers grew restless. They had expected a quick kill, not this endless chase. Finally, Ethan crouched low, eyes fixed on the beast's joints. He remembered every detail from the night before, the way it breathed heavier after certain attacks, the way its handler pulled on its chain at key moments. Weak points. He had seen them, but he also knew he could not win yet. Not now, not here, not without a tool. He needed time. He needed the beast to reveal more, so he continued to move, not as prey, but as a predator waiting for the right opening. Velara leaned forward, her eyes sharp. For the first time in her long career of conquest, she felt something new: uncertainty. This fragile human should have been broken in the first strike. Instead, he was still standing, still fighting, still thinking. "Who are you, human?" she whispered to herself. The war beast roared again, shaking the arena. Dust rose in clouds, soldiers shouted and cheered, but Velara was silent, her mind racing, for she realized something her soldiers had not. The human was not running to survive. He was running to learn how to win. The sun rose high above the alien camp, casting sharp light across the stone arena. The soldiers gathered in ranks around the circle, their voices loud, echoing through the valley. Today was no ordinary day for them. Today they would witness a fragile human face the might of the war beast. They believed it was already decided. The beast was victory made flesh. The human was nothing but soft skin and weak bone. A game, not a fight. Velara stood at the edge of the arena, her arms folded across her chest. Her crimson armor reflected the light as she studied the scene with steady eyes. She had ordered this challenge not because she needed proof of her beast's strength, but because she wanted to understand this strange human. Ethan Hale had not broken like the others. He had not begged or trembled. He had spoken with quiet confidence, and that still gnawed at her thoughts. The guards pushed Ethan forward. His wrists were unbound now, for he would need his hands if he wanted even the smallest chance to fight. The soldiers laughed as they shoved him into the sand pit. His uniform was still torn and dusty, his body scarred from the battle that had captured him, yet he walked upright. Each step was slow, steady, controlled. The beast was restless behind the gate, its growls like thunder rumbling in the ground. Chains clattered as it pulled. Eager for release, Ethan stood in the center of the arena. He looked small compared to the walls around him, smaller still when the gate began to rise, and the shadow of the beast stretched long across the sand. The crowd cheered, raising their weapons high. The war beast charged out, its roar splitting the air. Its armored body shone in the sunlight, its claws dug deep into the sand, and its eyes burned with hunger. The ground trembled with each step as it came for the human. But Ethan did not run. He moved aside at the last second, just enough to avoid the swipe of its claw. Dust exploded where the strike landed, a mark of how close death had been. The soldiers roared with laughter. To them, this was nothing but luck. Velara's eyes narrowed. She knew better. Luck did not show itself twice. The beast attacked again, this time lunging with jaws wide open. Ethan dived forward, rolling beneath its chest, and springing back to his feet. He grabbed a fallen piece of metal from the sand, a broken shard from some past fight. It was small, jagged, but it was enough to be useful. He held it like a dagger. The crowd grew louder, mocking him. "A toy knife against a beast! Fragile human, you will die quickly!" Ethan ignored them. His eyes stayed fixed on the creature. He had seen its rhythm now, the slight delay when it turned, the heavy breath after it swung too wide. Weakness. Not obvious, but there. The beast circled him, growling, its tail sweeping sand through the air. It lunged again. This time Ethan did not simply dodge. He struck, ramming the metal shard into the softer joint of its leg before rolling away. The beast roared in fury, stumbling for half a heartbeat before recovering. The soldiers gasped. It was not enough to injure, but it was enough to prove something. The human had teeth. Velara's lips curved slightly. "Interesting," she whispered. Ethan breathed heavily, sweat dripping down his face. His body ached from the strain, but his mind was alive, burning with focus. Every second he survived, he learned more. The beast was strong, but strength alone had rules. Rules could be studied, rules could be broken. The war beast charged again, faster now, enraged by the sting of the human strike. Ethan ran toward the stone wall, baiting it. At the last moment, he leapt aside, and the beast smashed into the wall with a thunderous crash. Cracks spread across the stone, dust raining down. The soldiers laughed again, believing the human was only running. But Velara saw the way Ethan's eyes glimmered. He wasn't just running, he was testing. The beast turned with a roar, its breath hot and foul. It slashed again, and Ethan barely dodged, the claws cutting through his uniform and slicing his skin. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth and stood tall. He remembered the words of his old survival instructor on Earth. "Pain is a teacher. Listen to it. and you'll learn faster than anyone else." And he was learning. The beast lunged once more. Ethan dropped low, sliding across the sand, and slammed his shard into the creature's ankle joint. This time, the strike was deeper. Blood-like fluid sprayed out, and the beast roared louder, stumbling for real. The crowd erupted in shouts. Some were angry, some were surprised. None had expected the fragile human to actually wound the beast. Velara leaned forward, her eyes locked on Ethan. She could see it now, plain as the sun. This human was no fool. Every move, every step, every strike. He was building a strategy piece by piece. Fragile in body, yes, but inside him was fire. The beast shook its head, enraged. It stomped, the ground splitting under its weight, then rushed again. Ethan braced himself, breathing hard, blood dripping down his arm. He was running out of strength, but he was not out of will. When the claws came down, he dove forward again, rolling under its chest and stabbing upward with all his force. The shard bit into softer tissue near the beast's belly. Not a killing blow, but another wound. Another lesson. The beast howled, thrashing wildly. Ethan was thrown across the sand, rolling to a stop near the wall. His ribs burned, his body screamed with pain, but his eyes still burned with focus. The soldiers shouted for the beast to finish him. They wanted blood. But Velara raised a hand, silencing them. She did not want the fight to end yet. She wanted to see what more the human could do. Ethan pushed himself up slowly, breathing raggedly. His shard of metal was bent now, nearly useless, but it didn't matter. He had what he needed. He had knowledge, and knowledge was sharper than any weapon. He looked at the beast, at the blood dripping from its wounds, at the cracks in its movement. He knew the truth now. The war beast could be broken. The crowd did not see it. The soldiers did not believe it. But Velara did. Her laughter from before felt distant now. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Was this fragile human truly fragile? Or was he the most dangerous creature she had ever faced? The arena shook with every roar of the war beast. Dust clouds rose high, and the alien soldiers cheered louder with each strike. To them, this was still entertainment. They believed the human could not last much longer. His body was already battered, his clothes torn, his blood marking the sand. But Ethan Hale stood tall. He breathed heavily, sweat rolling down his face, but his eyes were sharp and steady. Every cut, every bruise, every drop of blood was another lesson. He had learned the rhythm of the beast, the weak joints hidden beneath its armor of bone and muscle. The human mind was his weapon, and he was sharpening it with every second. Velara watched from the edge of the arena, her arms still crossed, but her eyes intense. She had wanted to humiliate the human, to prove her point that fragility was weakness. Yet what she saw now disturbed her. The human was fragile in body, yes, but his spirit did not break. And worse, his mind was cutting through her beast's strength like a blade through silk. The beast snarled, dragging its wounded leg as it circled Ethan. Its breaths were heavier now, deeper, filled with anger. Blood-like fluid dripped from the gashes Ethan had already delivered. The crowd shouted for the finishing blow. The beast lunged. Ethan didn't retreat this time. He stepped forward. The sudden movement confused the beast, throwing off its timing. Ethan ducked low, rolled under the slashing claw, and jabbed at the joint in its arm with the bent shard of metal he still held. The weapon cracked in half, breaking completely, but not before cutting another weak spot. The beast screamed in rage and pain, staggering sideways. The crowd gasped. They had seen the impossible. The fragile human making the monster stumble again. Ethan dropped the broken piece of metal. It was useless now. But his eyes scanned the arena, searching, calculating. His hands found a chunk of stone, jagged and sharp enough to serve. He tightened his grip and turned back toward the beast. The monster roared and charged, fury driving its massive body forward. Ethan sprinted toward the side wall. The beast followed, faster than him, but that was the plan. At the last second, Ethan leapt sideways, pressing himself flat against the wall. The beast's claws struck stone, sending cracks splintering through it. Pieces rained down, striking the ground with heavy thuds. Ethan's mind sparked. The walls are weak, if I can use them. The beast turned again, but slower now, its wounded joints dragging. Ethan circled, forcing it to follow, keeping just out of reach. He needed to test his idea. He needed one more charge. The soldiers grew restless. Some shouted for the beast to end it. Others began to whisper, uncertain. This fight was lasting, far longer than it should. Velara stayed silent. She understood now what her soldiers did not. The human was not just surviving, he was planning. The beast roared again and lunged. Ethan ran straight for the wall, leading it into another trap. At the last second, he dove to the side. The monster smashed into the wall again, this time harder. Stone cracked louder, dust exploding upward. A section of the wall broke loose, tumbling to the ground in heavy chunks. Ethan rolled to his feet, his chest heaving, his ribs screaming in pain. He grabbed one of the fallen stones, larger than his arm, and hurled it at the beast's injured leg. The rock struck hard, right where he had cut before. The beast stumbled with a roar, collapsing onto one knee. The crowd erupted into shouts, some of anger, some of shock. The human had forced the war beast down. Velara's hand tightened on the edge of her armor. Her soldiers had no idea what they were witnessing, but she did. They were watching history change in front of their eyes. Ethan didn't pause. He grabbed another piece of stone, climbed onto the beast's lowered leg, and scrambled upward. The creature bucked, trying to shake him off, but Ethan clung to the ridges of its armor-like back. He crawled higher, his teeth gritted against the pain, until he reached the creature's neck. The beast threw itself side to side, slamming against the walls, but Ethan held firm. His arms burned, his body ached, but he refused to let go. He raised the stone high and slammed it down at the base of the beast's skull, right where he had seen the armor shift slightly. The first strike cracked bone. The second made the beast howl. The third drove it into madness. Blood-like fluid sprayed across the arena as the war beast roared in agony. It twisted, smashing itself against the wall to shake Ethan loose. Finally, he was thrown off, landing hard in the sand. Pain shot through him, his ribs nearly breaking. He gasped, struggling to rise. The beast staggered, its legs trembled, its roars weakened. The crowd had gone silent. Ethan pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His vision blurred, but his mind was clear. He knew he could end this. He picked up another shard of stone, smaller this time, and ran toward the beast with the last of his strength. The creature swung at him, but its arm was slow, heavy, wounded. Ethan slipped past the strike and rammed the stone into the same wound at the base of its skull. He pushed with all the strength left in his body, forcing it deeper. The beast gave one final roar, shaking the walls of the arena, then collapsed. Its massive body hit the sand with a crash that shook the ground. Silence fell. The alien soldiers stared in shock, their mouths open, their cheers dead in their throats. The impossible had happened. Their war beast, the monster that had crushed entire armies, lay defeated at the hands of a single fragile human. Ethan stood above the fallen creature, his chest heaving, his body broken, but his eyes steady. He had no weapon left, no strength left, but he had victory. Velara's heart pounded in her chest. She stared at him, unable to look away. This was no fragile creature. This was something else entirely, something dangerous, something unbreakable. For the first time in her life, the commander of the Zorath Legion felt not pride, not control, but fear. The war beast lay still on the sand. Its massive body collapsed like a broken mountain. Dust settled across the arena, and silence fell heavier than steel. The alien soldiers who only moments ago had shouted with laughter and cheers now stood, frozen. Their chants had died in their throats. Their pride had been crushed along with the monster they believed invincible. And in the middle of the silence stood Ethan Hale. His body was weak, his uniform torn and covered in blood. His chest heaved with every breath, but he did not fall. His shoulders were straight, and his eyes, sharp and calm, moved across the crowd. He did not raise his arms in triumph. He did not boast. He simply stood, as if daring the universe to deny what had just happened. For the first time, the Zorath soldiers saw the human not as prey, not as fragile, but as something else, something terrifying. Whispers spread quickly through the ranks. How did he do that? The beast. It has never fallen. Fragile. No. He cannot be fragile. The soldiers' voices trembled. At the edge of the arena, Velara watched, her jaw tight. She could still hear the echo of her own laughter from the day before, mocking this human, calling him weak, soft, breakable. Yet now, as she looked at him standing above the fallen beast, she felt her chest tighten with something unfamiliar. It was not anger, it was not hate, it was fear, mixed with respect. She stepped forward, her crimson armor glinting in the sun. The soldiers' voices fell silent as their commander entered the arena. Velara's boots crunched on the sand as she stopped a few paces from Ethan. He turned his gaze toward her. His eyes were tired but unshaken. "You—" Velara began, her voice lower than usual. "You should not have been able to do this. That beast has shattered armies. It has torn through steel, and yet—" She gestured toward the fallen creature, her claws curling into a fist. "You stand. It lies broken." Ethan wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand. "Strength doesn't make you invincible," he said simply. "Creatures fall. Empires fall. Everything that thinks it cannot be broken. Eventually, breaks!" The words stung her. They cut deeper than any blade, because she knew there was truth in them. She could see it in his steady eyes. Some of her soldiers shouted from the stands, trying to restore their pride. "He tricked the beast!" "It was luck. He cannot stand against us." But their voices sounded hollow, even to themselves. They had seen the fight. They knew it was no trick. The human had studied, adapted, and used his mind where muscle could not win. He had done what none of them believed possible. Ethan turned his gaze on the soldiers. His voice was calm, but it carried across the arena. "You think I'm fragile?" he said. "And maybe I am. My bones break easier than yours. My body is weaker than yours. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that humans don't stop. We don't surrender. We don't give in when the world says we should fall. You see weakness. What I see is survival. What I see is the reason we are still here, still fighting, even when the odds are impossible." The soldiers shifted uneasily, their weapons lowering. His words pressed into them like weight they could not throw off. Velara's hand twitched. She wanted to silence him, to strike him down before his words spread like fire, yet she could not move. Deep inside, part of her wanted to hear more. Ethan stepped closer, his body shaking from exhaustion, yet his voice still strong. "Your beast was supposed to be unbeatable, but it wasn't. And neither are you." The words echoed through the arena, bouncing off the stone walls. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, slowly, the war beast let out one final weak groan before its chest fell still forever. The sound sealed the truth. The soldiers looked at the body, then at Ethan. The legend of their unbreakable weapon had shattered before their eyes. And it had been shattered not by an army, not by machines, but by one fragile human. That night, the camp was different. There were no victory songs, no loud laughter. The soldiers sat in silence, whispering among themselves, stealing glances at the human prisoner who now carried the weight of a legend. Some looked at him with hatred, others with awe. Velara stayed in her command tent, staring at the floor. She could not push the image from her mind. Ethan standing tall, unbowed, while her beast collapsed. Her pride had cracked. For years she had believed the Zorath were unmatched, destined to rule the stars. Now doubt gnawed at her heart. She thought of her earlier words, the ones she had spoken with such confidence. Fragile, soft, weak. But fragile things were supposed to break, and yet this one had not. Instead, he had broken her. Ethan sat by the fire, his hands still bound but his spirit freer than it had ever been. He looked up at the alien sky, stars burning bright. His body hurt, but inside him there was peace. He knew he had done more than survive. He had planted fear. He had shown them that humans were not what they thought. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. More battles, more pain, perhaps even death. But he did know this. The Zorath would never forget the day their war beast fell, and neither would their commander. By morning, the whispers had spread through the entire camp. Soldiers spoke of the human with wide eyes, some with disbelief, others with quiet respect. Some even began to call him by a new name in their tongue, a word that meant unbreakable. Velara listened to the whispers and felt the weight of command press on her shoulders. She had mocked him once, but now she could not. He had not just broken her beast. He had broken the certainty of her people. And as she stared at him from across the camp, watching him sit calmly with his bruised body and steady eyes, she realized something that chilled her to her core. The fragile human had already won more than the battle. He had won their fear. Morning came cold and quiet in the Zorath camp. The soldiers who once celebrated victories with songs now moved silently, their eyes heavy with doubt. The war beast's body had been dragged away in the night, but its absence left a deeper mark than its corpse ever could. For the Zorath, the beast was more than a weapon. It was a symbol. A symbol now shattered by the hands of a single human. And that human, Ethan Hale, sat bound near the center fire, his body battered, his clothes torn, but his spirit unbroken. His eyes followed every soldier who passed, not with fear, not with arrogance, but with calm awareness. He saw the way they avoided his gaze, the way whispers spread whenever they thought he could not hear. They don't see me as fragile anymore, Ethan thought. They see me as a reminder of something they don't want to believe, that they can be defeated. From her command tent, Velara stepped out, her crimson armor polished, her face calm but her thoughts storming. The weight of command pressed on her, shoulders like never before. She had built her reputation on strength, certainty, and victory. Yet now she stood over a camp, drowning in uncertainty because of one man she had once mocked. She approached the fire where Ethan sat. The soldiers watched closely, but none dared speak. Velara stopped in front of him. "You should be dead," she said, her voice low, almost careful. "No one survives my beast. No one. And yet here you are." Ethan looked up at her, his lips forming the smallest hint of a smile. "Maybe you misunderstood what humans are." She narrowed her eyes. "Fragile. That is what you are. You bleed too easily. You break too easily. You live short lives. That is what I saw when I first looked at you." "And you were right," Ethan replied. His voice was calm, steady, not defensive. "We are fragile, but we don't stay broken. We learn. We adapt. We come back stronger. That's the part you missed." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably at his words. They could feel the weight in them, the quiet truth that could not be ignored. Velara studied him carefully. His body was proof of weakness, covered in cuts, bruises, scars. And yet, He had stood against her beast and won. Something deep inside her, something she had buried beneath years of victories, stirred again. Doubt. "You think your kind can stand against mine?" she asked, her voice sharp. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "Not just stand, outlast. Your people have beasts and weapons. You win battles with strength. But humans, we win wars with will. We don't stop, no matter how many times we're knocked down. That's why we're dangerous. That's why you should be afraid." The last word struck harder than any weapon. The soldiers muttered nervously. Some growled in anger at his boldness, but none could deny the truth. They had seen it with their own eyes. Velara clenched her fist. She hated the feeling building inside her, this strange mix of fear and respect. Yet she could not deny it either. "You broke my beast," she said finally, her voice lower. "But do not think you have broken me." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't need to. The cracks are already there. The beast was not just an animal to you, it was your pride, your certainty. And now it's gone. That's enough." Her eyes widened, just slightly. She hated that his words were true. She hated that she could not silence the thought now tearing at her chest. If one human could do this, what could an army of them achieve? The camp stayed quiet, all ears on the fragile human who was not fragile anymore. Ethan let his voice carry. Across the fire, across the ranks of soldiers who stared at him. "Tell your people what you saw here. Tell them that humanity is not prey. Tell them we don't bow to monsters or empires. We may look fragile, but inside, we are unbreakable." The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. The soldiers shifted, unsure if they should feel anger or respect. Some lowered their heads. Others clenched their fists. Velara stared at him long and hard. She could not laugh anymore. She could not dismiss him as weak. No, this human had changed something inside her and inside her soldiers. He had cracked their certainty, and once certainty was gone, fear grew fast. At last, she stepped back. "You will live, human. Not because you deserve mercy, but because my soldiers must remember this. They must remember the day you broke the unbreakable. They must remember that even fragility can hold fire." Ethan said nothing. He only sat quietly, his eyes watching, knowing that his survival was victory enough. As Velara turned away, her thoughts burned. She had led armies across stars, crushed worlds, destroyed fleets, yet this one battle, this one fragile human, had shaken her more than any war. She knew what her soldiers would whisper from this day forward. They would not whisper of her beast. They would whisper of him, the fragile human who was not fragile, the one who stood when he should have fallen, the one who shattered more than a monster. He had shattered their belief in absolute strength. And Velara understood, though she hated it. The legend of humanity had begun here, in her arena, in her failure. That night, as the camp grew silent, again, Ethan looked up at the stars. He thought of Earth, of the countless men and women who had stood in impossible situations before him. Farmers who faced famine, soldiers who fought hopeless wars, explorers who crossed oceans with nothing but wood and hope. Humanity had always been fragile, but humanity had always endured. He whispered to himself, "A vow to the stars. They'll never see us as fragile again." The fire crackled. The soldiers shifted in the shadows. And Velara, lying awake in her tent, heard those words echo in her mind. For the rest of her life, she would remember this day. The day she laughed at a human, and the day that human made her fear.